Good morning, everybody. Welcome along to this conversation starter. Thank you so much for coming in your numbers. It's really, really lovely to see everybody. So this could be a really great conversation this morning and an important one for our Scottish friends. So this is a bit of an exploration of how the Wales Older People Commission got started. So I'd just like to introduce some really special guests to you. So we've got Helena Herklotz, who is the current Older People's Commissioner. And we are really, really thrilled that Helena's been able to spend some time with us this morning, because I know how mad busy she is most of the time and the demands on her time and her team. So thank you so much for joining us this morning, Helena. We have Steve Milsom, who is the current COPA chair. That's the Cymru Older People's Alliance. Good morning, Steve. Thank you so much for joining us. Steve's going to be with us for half an hour, so it's lovely he's been able to make time. He's got an important appointment he's got to disappear to, but I have some of Steve's notes I'm going to present to you later. And then also I'd just like to welcome Ken and Gaynor as well from sunny Pembrokeshire. Gaynor and Ken have been hugely involved in the Cymru Older People's Alliance, and Gaynor was actually chair a couple of years back. So those two people are hugely experienced with older people's issues and have fought locally and been activists in that area as well. So it's, as I say, it's brilliant to see so many of you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Rachel, thanks very much. Thanks, Anne, as well, and thanks for inviting me to chat to you today about the role of the Older People's Commissioner in Wales. I too live in a rural area, so and I have already seen that my connection is unstable, which I don't know about you, but it kind of feels like our connection's been unstable for all through the pandemic in one way or another. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just chat for 2 or 3 minutes a little bit about the role and about kind of when I started in the role. And then I've got a presentation that SJ is going to help me with, just to give you some of the more factual stuff, and then really look forward to the questions and debate as we go forward. So I became Older People's Commissioner in 2018. And I should tell you that, in fact, Gaynor has some responsibility for this, because Gaynor was part of the interview panel. So I was interviewed by a panel of older people and a panel of what were then called assembly members and now members of the Senedd. I took up role there for about kind of nearly 3 years ago now, and then was really getting to the grips with that, 18 months in, and then the pandemic hit. So when I chat today, I'm going to be reflecting quite a lot on the last 18 months in particular, because I think it's shown, I would say it's shown the importance of the Older People's Commissioner role, actually, both here in Wales, and there is one other Older People's Commissioner in Northern Ireland as well. I'm also going to be referring to work that we've done. So I want to start by actually acknowledging the team of people that I work with. So I have a team of about 20. And when I'm talking about the work we've done, I'm very much talking about their work. And that team includes casework advisors. So we're able to provide one-to-one support and advice to older people. It includes people who lead on the priority areas that I have, that I'll talk about later. Includes a really important support team that help us run lots of things, events, and all the communications and all the engagement work that we do. And then I also have a designated deputy commissioner, who is also the chief operating officer, who leads and manages the organisation, and also have someone who heads up our finance and IT and governance. So we have a small organisation. And with that, I also have an audit and risk assurance committee that provide support and advice to me. The Older People's Commissioner role is designated as something called corporation sole, which effectively means that all the responsibility sits with me for the organisation, for everything that we do, for the governance, for risk management, for finance, and all of that. So I don't have a board of trustees as you might have in a charity, or a board as you might have in a company. So it is quite a different setup from ones that you might be more familiar with. So in a moment, we're going to start looking at the slides, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the development of the role. So way before I took it on, I'll talk through what the functions of it are, the legal powers it has. I'll give some examples of achievements and impact. And as I said, I'm going to talk particularly about, I think, the importance of these sorts of roles during the pandemic. So if I could ask SJ now to load up the presentation, that would be great. So that's just, if you want to follow me or the organisation on Twitter, that's the details. And if we go to the next slide, please. So here we are, there's a nice picture of the Senate there. And this all began back in 2003. And Steve Milsom, who's on the call, played a really important part in all of this. Steve was a key person in Welsh government at the time. And there was a great deal of sort of campaigning from older people to have an older people's commissioner. And in 2003, the Labour manifesto made a commitment to that, the first role of its kind in the world and fully independent of government. Let me go on to the next slide. I think it's an important piece of context here, and particularly if you're thinking about maybe setting up this role sort of elsewhere. The Welsh Government had also begun a lot of work on developing strategies for older people. And you can see here the journey, if you like, 2003, then a strategy for the 5 years in 2008, and a strategy from 2013. And Welsh Government has currently been consulting on a new strategy, which will be published this autumn, actually. So I think an important thing to say, it wasn't just about having an older people's commissioner. That was part of a wider strategy, a very progressive strategy back in 2003, around recognising our ageing society, the value of that, how that is something that we should celebrate, but also the need to prepare and plan for that. And crucially, one of the things that those strategies did was establish leads in local authorities called strategy coordinators to really join up the work in local authorities and local government and central government. And those strategy coordinators have played an enormously important role, particularly working with older people's forums. And that was also part of the strategic direction, was to have older people's forums in each local authority as well. So this is not by any means just about the commissioner. It's about that policy framework. It's about the commitment to engage older people and to enable older people to play their full part in that. And it's been, I would say, a little bit of a bumpy road since then, as one would expect, but I think that's been a really important part of how this all started. So we go on to the next slide. Here's a picture of the Act, the Commissioner for Older People Wales Act in 2006. It got the bill got royal assent in 2005. And if we go on to the next slide, please. We just move on to the next slide. Thank you. Oh, we've gone to, sorry. There we go, lovely. So this sets out the four elements of what the role is. So this is in the legislation. These are the words in the Act. So it is promote awareness of the interest of older people in Wales and of the need to safeguard those interests. Promote the provision of opportunities for and the elimination of discrimination against older people in Wales. Encourage best practice in the treatment of older people in Wales, and keep under review the adequacy and effectiveness of law affecting the interest of older people in Wales. The first thing to say, and a question I'm asked quite a lot, is, well, what is meant by older people? In this legislation, it defines, for the purposes of this Act and my role and remit, it defines older people as everyone over the age of 60. And effectively, these 4 points here are effectively my job description. So promoting awareness of the interest of older people, and that is older people in all their diversity across Wales, wherever they live, in whichever communities. I think it's very noticeable and positive that the word discrimination is there, and that this role is about the elimination of discrimination. It is also about encouraging best practice. So my role is partly around scrutiny and challenge, but also encouraging good practice, encouraging public services to do better. And then a role around the adequacy and effectiveness of law, and that includes policy and regulation and guidance as well. So to move on to the next slide, please. So under the Act, I have a number of legal powers, and I've set these out in a little bit of detail so that you can see what they are. And when I talk about some of the work that's being done, you'll see that these legal powers have been used. And this is where the commissioner role is different from any other role, is because I do have a set of legal powers. So, and they're called Section 3, Section 5, etc., according to the Act. So the first one is that I can look at the way in which the interest of older people is safeguarded and promoted when public bodies discharge their functions or fail to. So effectively, that means I can look at whether a public body, so that might be the NHS, local authority, for example, whether they have properly met the interests of older people. And in the Act and in the regulations, it lists all the public bodies that come under my remit, and that includes things like regulators, public bodies like local authorities and health boards, but also things like the ambulance service, education provision, things like that. The next one is about the review of advocacy, whistleblowing or complaints arrangements. And this is a really crucial area where we need to make sure that older people can seek redress, that complaint systems work well, that advocacy is available, and quite a bit of what a casework team deal with are issues about where we're enabling people to use those mechanisms. And talking of casework, this is the legal power that enables me to do that. So I can assist a person in making a complaint or representation to public bodies. So I could, for example, provide financial assistance if someone really wanted to take their case further forward. But a lot of the work is day-to-day support, enabling people to get the support that they need to challenge decisions, to know the law, and to have support in taking that forward. And the next slide, please. And then the final two areas are what's called examination. So this means I can examine the case of an older person that affects a wider group. Sometimes issues come up that maybe one person is experiencing, but actually you know that it affects more people, and that if you can really examine that case, potentially you can make wider change happen. So it's an important element of it. And then Section 12, which is again one that is used quite a bit. So I'm using that, predecessors have, around producing guidance. And it's pretty broad, with any matter relating to the interest of older people. And then once I produce that guidance, public bodies have to give due regard to the guidance, and I monitor and follow up on that. And at the moment, we're just developing some guidance, for example, on digital inclusion. So if we go on to the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit now about some things that my predecessors achieved. So I'm the third commissioner. So the first commissioner, Ruth Marks, one of the pieces of work she did was a really important study on hospital care. And she produced a report called Dignified Care, which looked at the experiences of older people in hospitals in Wales. And this had a series of recommendations that health boards and Welsh Government should make. And to give you an example, some of those recommendations fed directly into a new performance management framework, which had dignity and respect at its heart. Health Inspectorate Wales, the regulator, committed to inspecting in terms of dignity and essential care. Welsh Government introduced a new framework for what they called assuring service experience. So the ability really to do that work, to get the experiences of older people, to work with relevant stakeholders to produce a report, but then for the recommendations of the report really to feed through into change. If we go on to the next slide. So in June 2012, so this was under the second commissioner, Sarah Akira, who established the Aging Well programme in Wales, which is really a partnership programme, really focusing on improving the health and well-being of people aged 50 and over. It included 5 priority areas, so the development of age-friendly communities, dementia supportive communities, falls prevention, tackling loneliness and isolation, opportunities for learning and employment. And that network of Aging Well partners, if you like, has been incredibly important and impactful. And in fact, when I became commissioner in 2018, I identified Aging Well as one of my kind of core priorities. So that work is very much embedded in our overall work. So an example here, this is not about using legal powers, it's really using the role to be able to bring people together. So the sort of convening power, if you like, and very much about good practice and working in partnership. The next slide, please. So another major piece of work done by the Commissioner Sarah Akira was into the quality of life and care of older people living in care homes. And this is a report I've actually gone back to a couple of times this year, given everything that's been happening in care homes, not just in Wales, but across the UK. And extraordinary breadth of work here, with visits to 100 care homes, a huge amount of evidence from older people, from staff, from families, from experts. And this has led to a lot of ongoing work. And in fact, some of the recommendations and some of the work is still ongoing. One of the things, for example, is around the registration of care home workers, which is underway now. It was very much focused on putting human rights much more into things like the regulatory system, and that's very much been done with the Care Inspectorate Wales. And there's some really practical recommendations about things like dentistry, oral health for older people living in care homes, meal times, the way in which meals are sort of served, and the quality of life is a big focus on quality of life. So a major report. And then the next slide just gives an indication of some of the work that is all what we also do in terms of providing information, sometimes to practitioners and professionals, sometimes to older people, sometimes to both. And this was very much about the issue of protection and a guide to the law. So if we can come on to the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit more now about what I've been doing since I took up the role. So when I came into post in 2018, I did a lot of engagement and consultation work to develop the priorities that I wanted to take forward as commissioner, and the strategy that I would have. And I called it, rather ambitiously, making Wales the best place in the world to grow older. But I did that very deliberately, partly because I felt that actually there was a huge amount of very good work happening in Wales, and that should be celebrated, and that we could be ambitious and strive to be the best place in the world to grow older. But also I wanted to frame my work really celebrating the fact that we are living longer, and we are having we are experiencing and part of an aging society, so that we view that much more positively than perhaps is the norm. So that very much sort of set the framework. And the next slide shows you the priorities I identified, which were 3 main priorities: to work to end ageism and age discrimination, to enable everyone to age well, and to stop the abuse of older people. So my work really has focused on these 3 big broad areas. During the pandemic, the issue of as you're kind of scrutinizing and holding to account and protecting and promoting older people's rights has also been to the fore. So those 3 areas have certainly been key. The promotion and protection of older people's rights has also been particularly key in the last 18 months. So just to give you a flavour of some of the things I've done, if we go on to the next slide, please. We undertook some work to publish a State of the Nation report, so really to give us an evidence based on what the experience is of growing older in Wales. We launched this at the Senedd. We had a kind of cross-party debate on it, and actually this is another report that I turn to a lot because it brings all the data and evidence together. Importantly, what this also showed, however, was where there isn't evidence and where there isn't data, and where older people's experience was therefore rendered invisible. So that also gave us some areas for further action. On the next slide, please. So taking forward the work on ageism, so we launched a campaign in 2019 on everyday ageism. This is one of the graphics from it. So this was really to call out those things that happen all the time, whether it's things we've seen in the newspapers or here or seen on the radio or whatever. That everyday ageism and the impact of that, we wanted to challenge. So we started doing that work. We started, when we saw it, challenging it. We started getting people to pledge to challenge as well. And that work was progressing really well in the latter half of 2019. And then we went into the pandemic, and actually the issue of ageism and the impact of age discrimination became so visible, didn't it? And we really saw the damage that it does. The next slide, please. So a lot of my focus is also on how we empower older people, and a lot of that is about making sure older people know their rights. So just some examples here of what we've produced in the last couple of years. So a guide on care homes, kind of the questions that older people ask about care homes. Know your rights. This was the thing that I brought out almost immediately after coming into post. So really setting out older people's legal rights. And then much more recently, about abuse of older people, we've set up an action group in Wales of about 30 organisations working to stop the abuse of older people, and that's one of the kind of the key information guides that we've produced. You'll see a slight change in colour. So we went to a different colour palette about 2 years ago as well. And the next slide, please. So this is the kind of final one before we kind of come on to questions and things, and a little bit about COVID-19. And I'm just going to talk for a few minutes on this. So one of the things I was really concerned about as we went into lockdown was how that could exacerbate issues of abuse, because we wouldn't know what was going on behind closed doors, and the usual checks that there might be, weren't happening. So we undertook to bring organisations together, and we have about 30 or so organisations now as part of this abuse action group. Includes the police, health services, local authorities, domestic abuse agencies, older people, and it's been a really powerful group, actually. And I'm incredibly grateful and impressed really by the commitment of all those organisations. And we've done a huge amount to raise awareness of abuse, to look at how it can be prevented, and to improve support and services. And one of the things we focused on, as you can see from that picture there, is about accommodation and support for older people experiencing abuse. Put fundamentally, refuges are not geared up to older people. So if you're experiencing abuse in the home and you want to leave, there are very few options for where you can go. So we're setting out to change that. And we've now done a further report, actually, that we released just last week, and are really now beginning to shift policy, shift understanding, and hopefully really make a difference in terms of prevention and the services are available. Throughout the last year, since last February, March, I've had to engage with older people in very different ways. So normally, in normal times, I would be out and about. I'd be on the road, on the train, on the bus, meeting people where they are, length and breadth of Wales, and that's not been possible. So we've had to do engagement via Zoom or telephone or email, but we've done a huge amount of that in whatever way we can, and that's really been about understanding older people's experiences of the pandemic, making sure that when I'm talking to ministers or talking to health boards or on the media, that I am informed and have in my head the words of older people and the experiences of older people to the fore. And we brought that together in our Leave No One Behind report, which we termed Action for an Age-Friendly Recovery. So setting out what older people had told us, setting out the evidence that we had, and our analysis of what needs to change and what needs to improve. And we've really been driving forward some of those kind of actions over the last 6-9 months. And then the final point about protecting and promoting older people's rights. So I've worked with older people all my adult life, so well over 30 years now, and I've never known a time when I felt older people's rights were more under threat than over the last 18 months, and some of that was truly shocking. You will probably all remember or know about some of the things that happened early on in the pandemic. The older people that were given do not attempt CPR notices without consultation. That feeling that if you remember the language of the pandemic very early on was about, well, this is something that only affects older people, as if somehow therefore it wasn't as serious. And I think it's been where having a commissioner has been particularly important. So the way in which I've been sort of interpreted my role over the last year is being as visible as possible for older people, to scrutinise and hold to account and challenge where I felt things weren't being done right, to make sure that we were staying as close as possible to older people, even if we can't be with them kind of physically close, as well as highlighting where things were going well, and when communities were coming together to support each other. And one of the things I did as the pandemic started was I set up a kind of a UK network of older people's organisations, and we've been meeting regularly since then, really sharing issues and challenges that we're all facing, whether that's around protecting people's rights in care homes, trying to get testing into care homes, get support, challenging restrictions on visiting and so forth, whether it was about making sure that we were challenging issues about do not attempt CPR. And it's meant that I've worked closely with Eddie Lynch, who's the Commissioner for Older People in Northern Ireland. I've worked closely with Age Scotland and Scottish Care, with Age NI and with Age UK and others. So it's been a fantastically helpful network, really, but also I think it's identified the things that myself and Eddie are able to do, because we are independent commissioners and we do have those legal powers, and that gives us a level of influence that I think is really important. So the final slide just says thank you and asks if you have any questions. So thank you very much and thanks for listening.
So Steve Milsom is the COPA chair at the moment, and Steve, bless him, he took the trouble to join us this morning, but he's had to dash off to an important appointment. But he very kindly left me with some notes that he was happy for me to read, and he's also very happy for those notes to be circulated afterwards. So Volunteer Matters and the Outside the Box team will make sure that you get those if you need them. So just a little bit of Steve's biog. Steve's been the COPA chair since November 2019 and a trustee since it became a registered charity in 2017. In his former Welsh Government role as the head of adult social care policy, he was heavily involved in the creation of the legislation for the Commission for Older People and establishing the office. And I think Helena alluded to that in her presentation. After retirement in 2013, Steve is a member of Cymru Older People's Audit and Risk Committee for 4 years, up to 2020. He's also been a member of various advisory groups over nearly 8 years since his retirement. And he's also a trustee at Age Cymru and a vice chair for Caerphilly 50+ Forum. So that's Steve's little bio. I'll just go on to some of his notes now. So the Commissioner for Older People's Wales Act 2006 led to the establishment of the Commission's office in 2008. First post of its type in the world, as Helena has said, using the Children's Commissioner model from Norway and Wales. older people's representatives that were consulted fully during the passage of the legislation and subsequent regulations made by the then Welsh Assembly. And from an older people's perspective, the main functions of the Commissioner were awareness of the rights of older people, an interest of older people, challenging discrimination, encouraging best practice in the treatment of older people, and reviewing the law affecting the interests of older people. And again, Helena identified those as 4 key areas of work. It was to provide a means of getting older people's voices heard and acted upon, and their interests represented in how services are provided and how their lives can improve. So I did ask Steve to tell us about how the Commission's work affected things on a grassroots level. So he laid out the main benefits for us. He said, so, you know, there's dialogue with ministers and officials, senior figures in councils and public bodies, all based on evidence from older people gathered directly from engagement. There've been 1,000+ people helped on specific issues to do with the NHS, social care, care homes, safeguarding, etc. And help has been provided on complex cases, and there's been a referral mechanism to other agencies where appropriate. It shines a light on and has shone a light on care homes, safeguarding, access to GPs, ageism, and raising a public awareness and holding public bodies, including Welsh Government themselves, to account. So there's been the recruitment of the Cymru Older People's Alliance. So older people have been fully involved in the recruitment of the 3 Cymru Older People's Alliance, including Commissioner for Older People, including a panel of older people and representation from each main political party. And hopefully it's giving a sense of ownership. Advisory groups are run and hosted by the Commission for Older People, currently age-friendly communities, abuse and intergenerational solidarity. As Helena said, there have been COVID meetings for the last 15 months, and those have been very, very frequent, weekly or fortnightly, and with all national older people's organisations present to discuss COVID and the impact of it. And this has enabled COPA to report to fora and their networks and to feed in questions to subsequent meetings so that there's a good flow of information. In summary, Steve is saying that the post of the Commissioners proved an essential lever in upholding rights of older people, representing their interest in improving lives. And the progress made over the last 13 years at grassroots level has been a really impressive forming, storming and norming analogy. So the impact of the Commissioner has now matured. It's now very significant and something that older people's groups regard highly and as indispensable in life in Wales today. The Commissioner's office gives confidence to older people and their representatives that they have someone to champion them and their interests. And there's a great track record of involving older people in decisions that affect their lives. This is improving, but more still needs to be done, particularly on consistency and with excluded groups. And that's not just the responsibility of the Commission. Steve's thoughts for the future. He would like to see better joint working across Welsh Government on older people's issues so that everybody has strong links with the Commission, not just health and social care, and that funding and capacity can be improved in the Commission with the aim of restoring the equivalent of pre-austerity resources by 2025. He would like the regularisation of the appointment term to the same as other commissioners so that we can keep Helena for longer. And then finally, more support for the Commission to help create more age-friendly communities across Wales on a consistent basis with transparent involvement of older people from the outset. So I know Steve isn't here at the moment, but I really want to thank him for that contribution. Really thoughtful contribution, and if anybody wants those notes, they can have them.
The question as to whether Scotland should have an Older People's Commissioner is something that's been going on for a while now, and it has very divided opinion. On one hand, we have a lot of people saying that an independent commissioner would protect and promote human rights for older people. They would play a key role against discrimination, and they would be able to hold public bodies to account more than what we have currently. Whereas on the other side, what we're hearing is actually we should be strengthening and promoting what already exists within Scotland. So
lost the sound again there.
Shall we come to the other questions in the chat while we sort out technology?
The rest of the local authorities to do that. We also have a minister for older people and equalities within who sits in the government level, and there are many routes to be able to feed in directly to the minister. One of which is through the Older People Strategic Action Forum, which many older people's organisations sit on, and they have regular meetings with the minister to be able to discuss what's happening and opportunities to feed into policy, etc. So there's a real debate as to whether we should be strengthening those, making things like that much more accessible. And the OPSAF group have very much played a key role in some of the what's happened during COVID and some of the responses that has come from government for older people. So I suppose the questions that we have are to the Commissioner from Wales is, where would you see a Commissioner's role sitting within the current Scottish setup? And what does your role bring that's different to what we have already here? And I suppose the next part in this probably big bit is, what would you say to persuade those who are a little bit doubtful of the value of having a Commissioner within Scotland?
Okay, so I think the questions were sort of starting point, some divided opinion about whether to go down kind of the route of having an older people's commissioner, whether to strengthen existing structures and existing ways of working. So I don't think it's an either or. I think it's probably both. And when I talked about the role of the Commissioner in Wales and showed the presentation, I deliberately talked about the kind of strategies as well, because you need both. You need a policy framework, you need the right structures of engagement of older people, of access to ministers, and I think you also need a commissioner role as well. I think one of the questions for me as I came into the role, because I didn't quite know what to expect. It's a very different role from anything else that exists. But I think that there are a number of things that make it different. First of all, it is independent. So I decide on the things that I think need to be worked on. I do that very much working with older people and others. But I can make those decisions and decide where I think I need to focus my attention. I have a kind of a budget to work with Welsh Government. So Welsh Government pays the budget, but otherwise, I determine exactly what I'm working on. And the legal powers do make the role significantly different, because I have the power to hold Welsh Government to account. I have the power to hold public bodies to account. And that means that the relationship is different from the relationship between, say, an advocacy organisation like Age Scotland and Scottish Government or Scottish public bodies. And having been, before I came into this role, I was running a charity called Carers UK, so I was very familiar with how to advocate, how to work with governments and public bodies as a campaigning charity. But this role is different because of those legal powers, and it gives you the ability to take action. So, for example, conducting investigations, issuing guidance which public bodies have to give regard to, being able to monitor and review what they were doing. So there's a host of levers there to effect change and to hold organisations and government to account, which are not held elsewhere. So that the role brings with it another set of powers and levers to affect change. And I think the other thing I'd highlight, and I just caught at the very end of what Gaynor was saying, is I think it's really important that that older people have someone that they know is their commissioner. I'm not anyone else's commissioner. I'm here for older people, and that's incredibly important to me as a starting point, actually. And it's important, I think, that older people in Wales know that there is someone whose role is for them, that they feel that they know who I am, and that they can contact me or my office and will advocate for them, and that they know that the person doing that has a legal standing and has a power and influence. So to give some very practical examples, if I think about the work of my casework team, we know that, if a letter goes out on headed paper from me as the commissioner, it has an impact that it wouldn't do if it came from someone else, for example. I am able to and I do engage constructively with Welsh Government and ministers, but equally I'm able to have very robust and frank conversations and discussions where if I feel that actually what's happening is not right for older people. And I'm able to kind of convene and bring together organisations to take action as well. So I would, I can certainly see the enormous value of it in Wales, and a lot of that is due to the work of the people who held the role before me, and the work of older people in engaging and championing it. I hesitate to suggest, where it should sit in the current Scottish setup, because I don't know the detail of that, and I'm not sure it's my place to say. But I've certainly have learned a huge amount in terms of what the role can do, and indeed an experience in Northern Ireland similarly, where Eddie Lynch is the commissioner there, and he and I have had a number of conversations over the last 18 months about action that we've been able to take in our commissioner roles that wouldn't have been possible and aren't taken by other organisations. So for me, I think the pandemic has probably shone a light and indicated why the roles are so important.